Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. New week, new edition. Glad to have everyone join with us. Hope that you will share with us where you're joining from. It's always interesting to know where our audience is from. And of course, be sure to feel free to engage with questions and comments. And uh, feel free to ask those of me, of our guest. Happy to share that time with you. Like to always share a bit about our view of the wisdom journey. And it is indeed a journey. And the wisdom journey starts with gaining knowledge. And gaining knowledge is important, and it's the starting place. Unlike what some people want to think, though, knowledge is not where we find our power. Knowledge is a good starting place, but our power is continuing in the journey. Next step in that journey is to take our knowledge and begin to use it, apply it, and use our understanding, gain understanding about it, and know how to effectively use our knowledge. And then the biggest step in that journey, of course, is shifting to wisdom. And the uniqueness about wisdom is we take our knowledge and understanding and we begin to see it and use it from a much bigger perspective outside of ourselves. Focus not just on how it affects us, but how it affects others and the world around us. And for those of us that have a spiritual bent, that we like to express that perspective as trying to see things through God's eyes. So we just want to always be seeking to gain wisdom and share it. And welcome, Rick, and welcome, Nada. Glad to have you with us today, and Damu and Karen. Glad to have you all with us today. And look forward to sharing some time with our special guest today. And our special guest today is become a good friend of mine. We've kind of engaged in different ways. And as I mentioned in the event announcement, James and I have had the great opportunity to take our networking and relationship offline and enjoy sharing times and moments together. So without any further ado, let me bring on James Flanagan, my good friend, and we'll get going with James. Hello, James.
Hey, how are you? Happy
I,
Monday.
I'm blessed. And you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the invite to the show. And, I saw all the excitement on LinkedIn. I love what you're doing, love the energy of your audience. So just feel very blessed to be here now.
Well, thank you. Welcome, Eunice. Glad to have you. So, James, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background so they can get to know you a bit, and then we'll go forward from there.
Sure, I would love to. So I am a married man, married to a beautiful, wonderful doctor who helps kids here in Metro Atlanta. I have two children, Rose and Grace, both under the age of 2, so they keep us very busy. I've been out of the military for about 3, going on to 4 years right now. When I was in the military, I was in for about 9 years. As a judge advocate, but that meant I was did legal advice, but also did a lot of other things when it came to communications and leadership of teams. I was really blessed to be able to be deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. I was stationed in South Korea for some time. So really got to lead some incredible teams around the world. And it was really just my honor to be able to represent the United States in a lot of diverse locations. But happy to be back here in Metro Atlanta. I work in corporate communications now, and I'm really driven in terms of trying to help the best I can veterans and folks, men and women leaving the military, find jobs. That transition could be so challenging, going from military life to civilian life. So if I could share my experience, give some tips, or connect people, that's really where I want to be.
Yeah, that's where you and I met initially. I believe you reached out on LinkedIn because you knew my passion for our veterans and military. And I remember, I think it didn't we have a first time around cup of coffee in Tucker?
We you have a great memory, brother, and I think that that's a great example of your generosity. I did reach out. LinkedIn and social media is a great platform for networking, and I think what you do is really second to none for networking. But I reached out. You didn't know me from Adam, but you were very nice in terms of connecting with me, sitting down, listening to my story, and just kind of finding ways to help me out. So I really appreciate it.
That was I really enjoyed getting to meet you that day and having those conversations. It's good for me to be able to just share with people and gain insights because I seek every day to learn something new, and so I learn from you, and I know we have since that time crossed paths in a number of situations, and always good to share and grow together. Uh, let's see. Welcome, very welcome, Eunice. Glad to have you, and Zaid. Glad to have you today. And Eunice makes a comment. Um, she says that I'm glad to say that I've made great friends offlines too. Hi, James. You have a great profile. Yeah, James. One thing about this audience, they're in tune and they don't let things just go by. And generally, it's in a great way. I am fortunate to learn from them. So, um, tell a little bit about your military experience. I know one of my connections asked the question about how did you keep going? What kept you able to stay focused on task and those sorts of things during your military time?
Yeah, it's a great question because the military experience is definitely unique. My father was not in the military, so I was kind of going in without too much knowledge of how it really worked. I think what really helped me was a couple of things, a number of things. I think number one, that sense of purpose and mission,
Mm,
or that calling that you have to serve your country was always big for me. I feel like I have I'm just very lucky to be born in the United States. Very lucky to be an American citizen. You can be
mm,
born anywhere and become an American citizen, which is wonderful. And the fact that I could show that on a daily basis and work towards helping our American mission, our American cause, was really what helped drive me on a daily basis. And I think kind of what you see with your audience
mm,
and with your group online and offline, it really comes back down to that concept of a team, which really
mm,
becomes even more so. It becomes a family, and being able to connect with people and being connected with other patriots. I mean, these people
mm,
had different political backgrounds a lot of times, different ethnic backgrounds, different backgrounds, religious backgrounds that I had, but we all had a common mission and we became a family like that. So I think the military has a lot to teach our society as a whole when it comes to getting along together, going after a big goal.
Yeah, I one of the values I find in my military work is the definite, clear purposes in what we do, and then with those that we work side by side with, the shared vision, and being taking care of our security, our safety as a country, and that purpose is just so remarkable. And and the bigger thing is that we get outside of ourselves because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we know it's not about us, and that's so key.
That's 100% right. Following a mission, a big goal greater than yourself, is
Mm,
so important, and that's something that I've noticed when it comes to transition. A lot of transition from the military to civilian life. A lot of service members don't necessarily have. They miss that big goal, whereas even
mm,
the was a tough day or a frustrating day, you had a big goal in the military. And sometimes some civilian jobs, you just don't feel like you have that big goal, that big mission. So being able to connect, and I think that's great advice and maybe a piece of wisdom when we're talking about wisdom, is you got to connect with a big goal, be it a religious goal, be it a civic goal, community goal, something for your family to really go after on a daily basis, to feel motivated. I think that's, as human beings, we need to go after those big goals.
Yeah, definitely. Again, finding purpose beyond ourselves. And one of the things, of course, I talk about with leadership is sharing a vision. And that is so powerful to bring groups together, is a shared vision. It doesn't mean that everybody shares that vision exactly the same way or go about fulfilling it. But at the end of the day, as you know, when times get tough, and I'm sure you experienced some times in your military career where things really got tough, and at the end of the day, your vision and mission became your clarity, and regardless of what's going on, you were aiming towards getting that mission accomplished, and shared that with your fellow soldiers. Welcome, Erica. Glad to have you with us. Really great to see you here. Erica's a good friend and connection for a while, so welcome. Well, before we get to other questions that I have, let's see what our audience says. Rick says, do we go to a system where everyone serves in the military? We learn to play in the sand together. So I guess he's asking about conscription or mandatory service.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for that. It's a great question because I've thought of that myself. I think that our nation or specifically our nation really needs to have a common purpose and a common mission. To find ways to work together. You know, I go back to reading about how Congress was back in the 50s versus Congress now, and we know the divisions and kind of the hatred and the toxic partisanship on both sides that happens. But I was reading some stories about how Congress worked in the 50s, and of course there were partisan battles, but there's this belief that we're all Americans at the end, that we all want to find a solution. We might have different solutions, but we want to find a solution to our problems. And a lot of that was attributed to the fact that these men that were in Congress at the time, mostly men at the time, had served together overseas had served together with a threat greater than themselves. So when they came back and they were doing the nation's business in Congress, there was this thought of, okay, we could disagree as an American family, so to speak. We know the enemies are outside these walls. Let's find a solution together. And I think now we don't necessarily have that common purpose. We haven't necessarily served together. I think that our when it comes to conscription or the draft, I'm a big advocate of just having folks who want to serve will serve in the military. I'm not big into forcing folks to do it, but I do think that we need to have some common purpose. So if there are activities that folks could join together when it comes to serving the poor in our country, or finding ways to help clean up the environment, those type of things, we need to get past our partisan bickering and really find common good where we could talk and we could really find common mission and goals together.
Yeah, Erica even raises a good point. Says we can't even go to a system where everyone in high school must have a customer service job for extracurricular
Yeah.
credit. Yeah, if we could even start there and get some opportunities to serve in a common way, and to gain some insight into working with people, could make a big difference. So shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned being a judge advocate. You know, I know what a judge advocate is, but I suspect a lot of the my audience may not. So Share a little bit about what a judge advocate is in the military.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a great question because we throw around one of the big things in the military, as people know, is that we throw around terms and acronyms, and it doesn't necessarily make any sense. It's this other language. So, judge advocate is I was a lawyer. I went to law school. Was passed a bar exam. Was ready to actually be a prosecutor. Was really what my goal was, to go after the bad guys and really help those in need. But when I was recruited to the Army, it was to be that lawyer, and provide that legal advice to those colonels and those generals, those senior officials on a whole number of issues. For example, I was a prosecutor for a while within the military. I had to prosecute some pretty rough crimes against kids, against women, that unfortunately occurred in the military, and I was a prosecutor for that. I also did some work which I really was proud of and honored to do, to be one component of it. I was an operational law attorney. So that meant that I had to understand, in a deployed environment, thinking about Afghanistan or Iraq, I had to really understand the rules of engagement and law of armed conflict. So these are concepts of, hey, this is what a commander wants us to do on the battlefield. Here are the rules that he wants us to follow when it comes to targeting bad guys. Are we following them correctly? So that's one thing that I'm proud of, the process that we have in the military, is that we are very aggressive in terms of going after the bad guys. But we also have protocols in place where we make sure we go after the bad guys. We try extremely hard to get it right. And sometimes in the fog of war, you don't necessarily get it right. But getting it right means following the procedures and following what the commander wants you to do. And I was that voice to say, hey guys, this is the right way of moving forward with things. Here's my advice on the best way to do that. I also had in Afghanistan, this was challenging, but I thought was a great honor to do myself. I got to lead a wonderful team where we talked about the rule of law and humanitarian rights with the local Afghans. So we had to go out, talk to Afghan tribal leaders, Afghan prosecutors, Afghan government leaders, and say, hey, look, if you have a prisoner of war, if you have a detainee, this is the right way of handling that individual. So we worked a lot with the International Coalition, the Red Cross, to make sure that people were treated fairly and under the law. So through all of that, I was one small component of a greater team. We had some amazing folks there working on a daily basis. And if you're watching this from the United States, I know we have people all over the place, but you could be rest assured we have some incredible people trying very hard to represent you the best way we can overseas.
Well, and knowing some other JAG officers, a lot of people don't understand. Yes, some of your time would be in a courtroom type environment, but there would be times where you were out and you had to be in the midst of the activity, even carrying a weapon for protection and engaging in some challenging environments, and at the same time advising people about making good choices in those environments. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So when you're in the military, you're always a soldier first, no matter what your job is. You're a cook, you do technology, you do communications, you do law. You're always a soldier first, and you're expected to be able to perform that. So what I like to say is the judge advocate was really that utility player on the commander's staff. He could do a little bit of everything and try to find solutions and really give the best advice possible to those commanders. We have some commanders overseas that are responsible for large areas of land and huge groups of people and troops and lots of responsibilities. So being able to help advise them to get their job done was really exciting for me.
Yeah. And again, just a whole different version of things in the military. Welcome, Ed Mario and Jennifer. Glad to have you with us. And so, yeah, Zaid has a question here. he's asked, what can people like you bring from the military into business?
I love that because that really gets to the heart of the matter, right? When it comes to transitioning service members and into the civilian sector. I think the biggest thing that any service member can, and certainly somebody that has been there for a little longer than a couple of years, is that they have a number of leadership qualities that you really can't teach on the civilian side. So when you're in the military, you have to lead from a very, very young, early age, young, without necessarily lots of experience. From a legal perspective, I was doing some things from a legal perspective and advising and different criminal prosecutions and providing advice that folks decades older than me would be doing. So I would say number one, it's that leadership component. So if you get somebody, you need leaders on your team, the military is where it's at. I think number two is we talk so much in corporate America. I'm in corporate America now in terms of building a strong corporate culture. And every corporation's a little bit different, but really building a corporate culture is essential. And military members, people, veterans getting out of the military, have an experience and bring a strong culture with them, in part because they have a very strong personalities. They want to be part of a team, they want to help the team, and they want to go forward with the overall mission. So if you want someone very dedicated to your team, give them a mission, give it to a veteran, and he'll go out and go do that. I think those would be two things. The third thing would be you have a lot of guys and gals coming out of the military that have just a lot of great technical experience. So aside from the leadership, aside from the culture, when it comes to communications, when it comes to technology, when it comes to cyber threats, they really were able to practice on some of the top of the line technology out there and have experience and wherewithal at a very early age that you wouldn't necessarily get later on. So I think those are the three kind of biggest things. And I love that question because I think a lot of times veterans think, oh, well, you're going to hire me because I'm a veteran. You're going to do something, you're going to help me out. At the end of the day, veterans need to be hired because they provide value, and they do provide value. We just have to articulate how.
Well, and one of the things about most veterans that I think is key in leadership is that veterans have experienced not being at the center of the world. In other words, the sense of selfless service is such a key component in the military because at the end of the day, we have to think about those around us, and we have to make sure that our brothers and sisters in arms are taken care of as well. So it's not always just about us. We learn not to be the center of focus in our world. And welcome, by the way, Paul. You know, Paul, our neighbor here, is joined us. Good morning, Paul. So another question from Erica. She says, now that Corporal Bulford has resigned his position as Justin Trudeau's personal security over his concerns that what law enforcement is doing is against their constitution and illegal. As a former JAG, how might this play out for Canada?
Well, so I don't know too much about the Canadian code and how that specifically works out. I will say this. When it comes to following the law is that typically, as service members, we have a responsibility to follow any type of lawful order from our commander in chief. And that's so important to understand because at the end of the day, if it's a lawful order, we have to follow it, even if we don't necessarily like it. There are people, though, and their determinations sometimes that you have to make of whether or not it's a lawful order. We hear some circumstances, perhaps back in Vietnam, is some great examples of unlawful orders that led to civilian casualties. And I think that's, it brings up a greater point. I'll say this just from the American perspective, compared. I don't, like I said, I don't know too much about Canada when it comes to this, but from an American perspective, we really ask our service members, our soldiers, our Marines, our airmen, to really be smart and to make wise decisions from a very early age in very complex situations. I remember overseas where you have 18 and 19-year-old, maybe high school dropouts that end up going into the military. They have so much responsibility in a
Mm.
complex battlefield to make a determination of what's right and what's wrong when it comes to that. And I always thought that was funny where, they're responsible for millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment, or responsible for dealing with tribal issues that have gone back hundreds of years, and then when they come back home to the United States at age 20, they can't go get a drink at the bar. Uh, so
Certain ironies, yes.
there's some ironies with that, but I think that's part of, our American military that we're so excited about, is that we ask our service members to be smart, to be aware of the law, and to follow the law, and apply the law and follow those orders. And it can be a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Well, and something key you said, okay, and this is what helps make veterans unique, is that you're forced, because of your circumstances, to gain a lot of wisdom. You're already trained to not focus directly on yourself, other than obviously you got to take care so you can continue to function. But in the same hand, as a soldier, you have a willingness to lay down your life, especially to protect your fellow soldier. And then in terms of the bigger mission of the security of our country. But as a result of that, we're forced to take knowledge and experience and get it outside of ourselves, because there's so much around us going on that we have to deal with. And so, among military, generally speaking, there's a lot more wisdom there because of the very circumstances that they work within, and a key part of leadership. And again, we can follow the rules of leadership and the how to's and all that. But when you've actually had to sit or be present and think it through and consider this, including that bigger picture, how is it going to affect this country, and how's that going to affect our country, and all that. There's a lot of wisdom gained there as a result. And I think that's something that our veterans bring offering to the corporate world that an average person does not.
No, I think you're spot on about that. And I saw that on a daily basis for very young individuals. People, I got to the real joy out of working with folks that were middle aged, folks that were in their 50s, 30s, people that were 18 and 19 years old. And that the level of maturity and,
Mm.
like you said, wisdom that you can either, someone told me once that said you can develop wisdom through time, but also through experience. Sometimes if you have
Uh-huh.
intense experiences, you develop wisdom very quickly. And some of these young men and women are very wise, and would provide, going back to the civilian job force, would provide immediate value to a lot of these companies that need experience and wise individuals.
Yeah. Generally, in the non-military world, wisdom comes with age, because we're just not, unless we are really actively seeking it or we have adverse circumstances. Most of us, we just take time to pick up on that wisdom. Whereas, again, the military, you're pushed into having to do that. Good news is, and this is the part of what we do here, is that if those that are purposeful in seeking the wisdom, you can grow in wisdom faster than waiting till you get to be my age. Hopefully, people are engaging in actively seeking out wisdom and gaining it at an early age. Let's see. Of course, Paul knows of how involved you are, and he's
Paul.
talked Bunker Labs, and talks a little bit. So share a little bit about Bunker Labs and what you're doing there, James.
Yeah, so Bunker Labs, I love Bunker Labs, and thank you, Paul. Thank you for watching. Paul is a great guy. He does some great stuff in Metro Atlanta. You got to check him
Yep.
out LinkedIn, so I'll give him a little plug with that. So Bunker Labs, it does a wonderful job. They're here in Atlanta. That's how I know them, but they're also nationwide. And really, what Bunker Labs says is, look, you have a lot of service members that are leaving the military, some still in the military, that have these side hustles that have become jobs. So when you're in the military, you're often moved from place to place. And a lot of times you will develop a business, a consulting organization, that sort of thing. As long as you can follow through with your military commitment, you can still do that. And then when you go out of the military, a lot of folks want to start a small business. It's kind of that feeling in the military where I can figure it out. I'll get it done. I'll start the team. I'll start going with that. So they have this energy to start that small business, but they may not necessarily have the tactical knowledge of, hey, how do you form a business? How do you get your LLC going? What are bylaws for a particular business? What do you have to do to file? All of those important things to keep it legal, keep it going. And what Bunker Labs is, this organization says, hey, let's get all of these veteran-owned businesses together throughout the country, and let's find ways where we could help one another. So you have experienced people coming in, you give talks to these individuals trying to start a business. Small business members help one another. Hey, I found some success doing X, Y, and Z. I suggest that you do that too. So it's a great opportunity to bring in veteran small business owners to kind of find best practices in order to continue their small business and be successful with it. We have a good organization here, Bunker Labs Atlanta. Check them out. They're on Facebook, all across social media if you want to help them out. They're always, if you have a small business, if you have a business, if you're in corporate America, you're thinking about what's the best way to really help out or support our veterans, try to get connected with Bunker Labs. They always need individuals that can provide that experience, some of that wisdom on the technical, tactical part that's about starting a business. Get out there and connect with them, but they do some wonderful work.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that about veterans that develop side hustles, if you will. I know my own son, my oldest son, served in the Marine Corps, and while he was stationed in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune, he actually discovered a real passion for emergency response. And he got involved as a volunteer fireman and then got into emergency medical response, and which led him, after he got out of the Marine Corps, to being a paramedic and so on. And so what people need to understand is that, my son's MOS was engineers, and he worked in that environment. But a lot of veterans, like you say, have other things going on their own time that make them very well suited for more than just what they did in the military. That may be a complementary activity, or it may even be very different. And so as people look at veterans, consider hiring them and working with them, that they really need to consider that there's more there than, obviously great leadership, great thinking processes, problem solving, but they learn skills outside that could factor into what they could bring to a company as a transition. And you're an example. You, in the military, you were a JAG officer, you're a lawyer, but you're not in a legal world now. You're in communications, and those are part of the skills you learned and developed in wartime. And so, yeah, that's a real key component that we all consider when you look at veterans and hiring them. Let's see. And Mario has a good question to throw out there. He says, James, what is the method and strategy you use daily to get great leadership engagement?
No, it's a great question, because that's really, at the end of the day, what we need to be all about is, as leaders, how do we engage with our groups? How do we get out there and move forward as a team? So I had the privilege of I had the privilege to have the opportunity to really meet with some incredible leaders when I was in the military, colonels and generals that had a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom when it came to that. And what I thought was great about what they did from an engagement standpoint was really going back to what we talked about before when it came to having a clear vision and having a clear mission, and people will follow you. I think a lot of times now what we complain about when it comes to politics and politicians is one time it's a vision one day, the next day it's a different vision, it's a different mission, things get changed along the way. But what I got to experience in the military is some individuals that said, hey, this is what we need to achieve during this time period. This is what we're being deployed overseas to go do. This is what I expect out of my leaders to do this. And I'm there for you. And that going back, I think that's number one important in terms of having a clear vision, make it known to everybody. Um, Also, number two, I think, is you need to, as a leader, going back to that selfless service. And I'm a Christian. I that's a big part of what I am, that selfless service and what I try to strive to do. And I think we brought this up earlier. As a leader, I knew everybody in the military, those generals, those colonels, the best ones, would be willing to put themselves out there and do the extra work. And would never do something, never delegate a responsibility they were not going to do themselves. So I saw, believe it or not, I saw colonels out there, middle-aged men out there fixing up sandbags or cleaning up after a snowstorm and that type of stuff where it's beyond. I think in corporate America, a lot of times we say leadership engagement. We send out an email and we say, well, that's leadership engagement, right? How's everybody doing? I hope everyone's doing great, from the president of some company. But really, people are looking at the action. So if you're out there cleaning up the snow, you're out there cleaning up after the team. If you're out there doing the practical job, that's the level of engagement that we want when it comes to leaders. And I think it's just a great example of selfless service that we are all trying to achieve.
Yeah, servant leadership.
Yeah.
That's the summation. And one of the things that I tell leaders when we're training, that they need to be servant leaders. And one thing that's unique about servant leadership is it's not a leadership style, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And what's always fascinating to me as I observe my brothers and sisters in arms, it's not something they turn on when they're uniformed, turn off when they go home. It is just becomes a part of their DNA. So that, like you said, you got generals, colonels, high level people that if it's for the good of the group and to make have benefit, they'll get out and do whatever it takes, get dirty, whatever, alongside the lowest ranking member of the military. And that's a part of the value of the incubation of leaders in the military. And let's see here. Paul shares that didn't know this, Paul, that you were a paramedic at one point. So yeah, if we can take our experiences that are indirectly related to things and apply them, it's really helpful. And yeah, definitely. And by the way, Richard, glad to have you, and Felix, thanks for being here. Appreciate that. So let's see here. Here's a question for you, James.
Okay.
From Richard. Says, would Bunker Labs have a component that works with veterans with disabilities?
I don't know. I bet that they do. I don't know if they specifically do. I bet that they would do. I will say that I remember that they had a certain veteran businesses where they utilized some of their disabilities to create a product, and then Bunker Labs was supportive of that. So I think what they're trying to say with Bunker Labs is, bring your veteran experience. Perhaps you're disabled in the military, or you were wounded in combat, or whatever it is. Bring your veteran experience. Let's start a business together and go forward with that. It's really exciting work of what they do. And if you check out, I encourage everyone to follow them on LinkedIn. and other social media platforms, they'll show little highlights of the businesses. So it's almost like Shark Tank in that they kind of promote the business, like, hey, check out what's happening. And the businesses are really interesting, very exciting stuff that they do.
It's a good place to start regardless, because if I don't know Bunker Hill in particular, but I know military and military organizations, if they don't know or can't answer your specific question, their next thing they're going to be doing is saying, well, have you tried it there or tried there or whatever? So
That's 100% right. So reach out to them, but any military organization will move you to another organization until you find your solution.
yeah, that's it makes me think the last time James and I were together was to support a friend of ours, Tim Eccles, who's been a guest on my podcast. And we know that about Tim. Tim's not military, but Tim has the heart and spirit. If he can help, he will do anything he can, even if it's just to refer you to someone else. And that's part of the whole servant leadership approach in life, and such a key component.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up about Tim, because he is such a great servant leader. He gives his network when he can and connects with folks. I think it also brings up a great point I'd like to mention now, that a lot of folks will come up to me and say, how can we best support our veterans? I think that there's an eagerness there to support our men and women leaving the military. And I always say, basically, networking, number one, is extremely important. Make sure to connect them with your network, and that could be as easy as setting them up for a coffee like we did before,
Yeah.
Or making a connection on LinkedIn. That's vitally important, because remember, these service members might have been gone for 25, 30 years of their life in a very different culture, very different environment, so they don't necessarily have the local contacts that you do. And number two, and this is very kind of a less high and lofty idea when we talk about all these great ideas like servant leadership and great mission, but take an opportunity to review their resume.
Yes.
It's so important, because we as we talked about before, in the military, we do a lot of acronyms and this weird language back and forth. I always encourage veterans, give your resume to individuals that are in your industry that you want to get into, and have them go over it and translate it from militaryese to really what recruiters look for. That was the biggest issue that I had getting out of the military, because I didn't necessarily know that. So if you're a civilian and you're in an industry, you don't have to know anything about the military, but you could sit down with a service member or a veteran and say, okay, well, what does this mean? Okay, well, let's translate this into something a recruiter would care about.
Yeah, in fact, I was at a conference last week, and one of the breakout sessions was, I work with the organization in the electrical industry. By the way, if anyone wants a job in the electrical field, let me know. Got a great opportunity. But the comment was that, like James says, is kind of funny, because we in the military have a book of abbreviations. It's like 500 pages. So the language is there that's very different. And just sit down and say, okay, for example, my Navy veteran son was an ET. Well, and we're not talking about ET phoning home, that kind of thing, but asking the questions. What does, you talk about doing communication system support. Okay. What the heck does that mean? And help the veteran begin to break it down into non-military language is such a key thing, because my training background is HR, but had I not have the military experience, I wouldn't know a lot of this. And so, a military veteran's going to put in their resume their MOS, and most people don't even know what an MOS is. And so that's a great piece of advice. As a veteran, go to someone in that world and show them your resume in a low-key environment, not under pressure, and say, would you give me some feedback or help me do something with this information that it'll make sense to in the civilian world.
Yeah, it is such a little thing for a lot of folks to do, but it's so important. It's so important. So really the civilians that maybe that are listening to this right now and want to help out, always be able to volunteer your time. And sometimes it takes all of about 15 minutes. Like none of
Mm,
these terms make any sense to me. You need to explain and translate what this means. And that will save that veteran hours upon hours, possibly days of weeks, months, years of rejection on the
yeah.
side. If you spend 15 minutes and look at that, so important.
Yeah. Welcome, Gabe. Glad to have you with us. And but yeah, that very act can go just such a long way uh, towards helping a veteran, and even talking through it, not just
Yeah.
read. They sit down, and part of what we did first time we got together is we talked through some things and tried to get it in the context of civilian world. Well,
Mm.
you did this, but have you thought about this and how it might be related? And so, yeah, definitely practical way that most anyone can be of assistance to a veteran.
So important. So important.
Let's see. Paul makes a comment. Servant leadership networking is awesome. Finding ways to help others with no expectations.
Hmm.
Yeah. And frankly, that gives any of us a real sense of value. And it helps us to begin to learn about being a leader because, and I get myself in trouble sometimes with this, but only real leadership out there is servant leadership. Anything beyond that is not about leadership. It's about management. It's about being the boss, those kinds of things, or trying to be a dictator, not a leader. Different world. And it's a good opportunity to practice those leadership skills and benefit others at the same time. So it's a win-win. um, Wow. So we've had covered a lot of territory. I know you're very active in your church and community,
Yeah.
James. Share a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, so it's exciting for me. I'll say this: I was born and raised a Catholic. It's very important to me. It's important to how I am as a father, as a man, as a husband. Is whether or not I follow those Christian beliefs. When I was in the military, one of the things I found out, which was very very important to me, is that no matter where you were. Korea, in the Middle East, Afghanistan, throughout the United States, you always had that Christian community that you could rely on.
Mm,
So we have military chaplains that were so important. That once again, soldier first, but they also were those military chaplains, so they were expected to do everything that a soldier would have to do as well. Some of the greatest leaders I met were military chaplains, but it was always great to connect with folks, no matter where you are on the planet, that had that Christian faith.
mm,
So important because you felt like you were back at home. You thought you were
mm.
back at your family. What was really exciting, this might seem interesting, or maybe people haven't necessarily taken this, maybe folks might take this for granted. When I got out of the military, I really wanted to find a church that I could put roots down in and really call my own, because I was going from place to place, and there's something special about being a church that you can go to, that you've been there for a few years, that you get to know the people, that community. So we have a great church here in Peachtree Corners that we love, Mary Our Queen, such a great church. And being able to connect with other families there, and my girls are very small, but people get to know their names and connect at a fundamental values level
Mm.
is so important. I think in today's secular world, or not even necessarily Christian versus any other religion, I think that there's an absence of faith as a whole. Something going back to believing something greater than yourself, that
Yeah.
selfless service. I think we're missing that in the United States and around the world. And I think that makes a lot of souls feel empty. because there isn't something greater than themselves. So it's so important, and I know it's important to you, and it's probably important to a lot of your audience as well.
Yes, I have a lot of people in my audience that we have a shared faith. Doesn't mean that we necessarily go to the same churches or whatever, but it's more at a core level of, like you said, outside of ourselves, and a sense of gratitude for what our faith offers, and the difference it can make in our lives, and the sense of community. It's really interesting on LinkedIn for me that one of the key components of what I do and who I am on LinkedIn is about faith. And because I believe it's such a critical component. And I know that many of us have not faced wars and lived in that, but we're living in a world right now that unfortunately feels like a war zone in many regards. And having a faith that can anchor us and keep us from, as the Bible talks about, getting tossed about like a storm, is such a critical piece. And this whole thing of living in constant fear is so unhealthy and so harmful to us, whereas our faith gives us a way to consider that we don't have to live in this fear, and that we can have faith in my case, in my Heavenly Father. That love for me, that grace is so remarkable. Knowing that I have that relationship makes such a key difference. I don't have to live in constant fear of whatever.
You're spot on. I think what we're dealing with in American society is that constant fear, and part of that is it sells on the media. We turn on TV, and violence and confusion and fear sells. But as human beings, it could be too much. You could oversaturate yourself. I'm all about getting folks being informed about the news. Don't get me wrong, but you become oversaturated with everything, and sometimes it's good to turn that off and connect one-on-one with a brother or sister in your faith, one-on-one, or even using the power of technology like we're connecting, but it's face-to-face and we're connecting that way, is so important. As as intrinsically as human beings, we need that connection to hold off that fear.
Well, and in some ways, our faith gives us some of the similar benefit that we get out of the military, and that is the relationships and the development personally and with others when we serve alongside each other. No, it may not be carrying a weapon to protect, but it may be carrying shovels to help. And so the value of faith and faith community is the opportunity to serve alongside. And that makes a difference in our relationships and our support system. One of the values that I am in my military currently is I know because of my military family, if I need something, a phone call, and I could probably have 20, 30 soldiers at my door going, what do we do? Well, the beauty of faith community is as you grow in that faith community, same scenario. If something was needed help, you could reach out and have people gather around you so quickly. And that alone, even if you don't have to call on those folks, the fact that they're there brings such a comfort and a reassurance that it helps us keep the fear and anxiety in perspective, knowing someone's always there for us. Welcome, Kamar. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Glad to have you with us. Go ahead.
I want to follow up on that. Such a great point, that sense of community, having people there. And I'll say something a little controversial, just because I think it's the truth, but I'll throw it out there because I know that that's what your audience likes, right? Just honest truth. I think a lot of what I'll just speak from Christianity because that's my faith background. I think, and I have a very strong. I'm surrounded by strong women. I have a strong mother. I have a strong sister-in-law, strong wife, toughest person in the world. I think, unfortunately, though, as men, too often we allow the women to do the heavy work in our Christian communities and in our.
Mm,
So it's great that we have women out there, and they do all of the work. A lot, and too often at some of our churches, they're out there volunteering, they're getting the church ready, they're doing all this and that, and there isn't necessarily that male influence in the church as it once was. I could even speak from past churches that I've been at where deacons have come up and ministers have come up to me and said, look, wives and mothers have said, hey, can you help bring my husband back to church? And because it's so important for our family, he doesn't want to go. So I think it goes back to kind of that brotherhood idea too, what you were saying, that battle that we feel like we might be in for when it comes to our faith. We need to encourage men to stand up like the women are doing and participate in their faith and be accounted for. And too often I think we as men, we take a step back and we say, well, that's not really my thing. I want to watch the game on Sunday or whatever it would be. So important, we need to be out there in the battle with the strong women in our life to really show what masculine men can be in faith.
yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. As a man, some of my greatest concerns and criticisms is for other men and their lack of willingness to step up and be real men. And I'm not talking about machismo and all that stuff. That's a bunch of uh, baloney. It's about being strong. It's about being strong in your faith and showing example of being a servant leader, starting in your family and then branching into your faith community. And for that matter, frankly, we need more servant leadership in men in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge across the board. We have as men, we have abdicated our responsibility. Key word is we no longer take responsibility, and that's truly sad. And it means if you're not willing to take the responsibility, you're not a leader. I'll be just very blunt, because one of the hallmarks, and in fact, there are three characteristics of a servant leader: we're taking responsibility, accepting what they've been given, and accepting those around them, and humility, and recognizing that at kind of a core of that, saved by the grace of God, there go I. And those three characteristics, if you're not there, you're not going to be an effective leader. So I'll not get on that soapbox real big, but Zaid comments that having faith in the Lord helps to have faith in others, despite many times I get bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the values of faith is that it keeps us um, willing to reach out and not get jaded, which is hard, especially current environment, to become hard and bitter towards the circumstances and the people involved. And so, yes, our faith, like you said, Zaid, goes a long way.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I had a friend of mine who's a strong Christian, but she was having some issues with people that didn't treat her very nicely, and supposedly from other Christians. And we had a great conversation. We were talking about, sometimes, a lot of times, as men and women, we're going to fall, we're going to sin, we're going to have issues with things, and that's why it's important to keep our faith in God
Mm.
moving forward. Because as men and women, we have flaws. We're going to make mistakes at how it is. But if we have our faith in God and understand that we're all imperfect, that goes a long way.
Well, and that goes to a point of military mindset. We don't leave a brother behind or a sister behind. And more we can translate that mindset into our current world outside the military and in our faith, we go a long way. So, All right. Well, James, we have run through an hour or close to it. Any final comments that you would like to make as we close out before we get off the air?
Yeah, sure. I just want to thank everybody for their great questions. Thank you for participating today. I think what this platform, or what this event is, this series of interviews and discussions, is so important for us to get involved when it talks about how we can be better servant leaders, how we can gain wisdom as leaders. It's something that we don't necessarily talk a lot about in corporate America. Really, wisdom is something that isn't necessarily mentioned. Servant leadership is hardly ever mentioned. So continue to come back to groups like this, get form that community, and I really appreciate the time, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thanks, James. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be a part, and I appreciate your sharing related to veterans and helping our veterans. It's a key thing, and learning some practical tips and some of the wisdom you've gained along the way. So, folks, join us next week. We'll be back next Monday morning. I don't know the topic yet, and I don't have a guest, so we'll do something wide open. We may even approach some talking about faith again, because we did a show on that a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think we got enough of that. But anyway, just watch for the announcement. Join us next week, and we'll have another exciting time of truly seeking wisdom together and learning and growing together. So thank you, everyone. God bless. Have an amazing week. James, thanks again. Talk to you all later. Bye.
Thank you.